Plenary though, right?
Ah,
No.
I don't know about anybody else. Several times today I said, oh, I get the evening off, and then I said, uh-oh.
Hey, we're doing a quiz in here.
Okay, you're all set to begin. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm still going to do the announcement. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is being recorded and transmitted by the town of Barnstable and is being broadcast over Channel 18 under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20. If anyone is planning to make an audio or video recording or transmit the meeting, they are required to notify the chair before doing so. Thank you very much. Right, and Madam Clerk, this is a roll call to open our special meeting this evening of December 10th.
Thank you, President Hebert. Councilors, Atlas,
Present.
Bogan,
Present.
Clark,
Here.
Cullum,
Here.
Dagwan,
Deborah,
Here.
Rep Cressetti,
Present.
Hebert,
present.
Levesque,
Yes.
Neary, Knapp,
Here.
Shaughnessy,
Here.
Starr,
Here.
Don Hilber.
Here.
Yes, we have quorum.
Thank you very much. I would ask everyone to mute themselves, and I would ask Councilor Atlas to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We now have a moment of silence, and please keep into your thoughts and prayers. We lost two wonderful people just this week. Our agent for the veteran agent, Mr. Scott Dutra. You would see him at all of our parades, all of our military Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and the very sudden loss of Scott Dutra. Big loss for all of our community. And also our World War II veteran, who you'd also see at Memorial Day services and at Veteran Day services, Mr. Joseph Gentile, and he has passed away also. To keep them and their families and friends in your thoughts. Thank you very, very much. So we're here for a very special meeting this evening. There are no orders of the day. This is strictly to look at the financial planning for the comprehensive wastewater management plan. The two main presenters this evening is our town manager, Mark Ells, and also Director of Finance, Mr. Mark Milne. So welcome, town manager, and welcome, Director of Finance, and all yours.
Well, thank you. I hope that you were able to get a copy of the outline that Mark Milne is going to present in a few moments. A lot of information. Certainly, we're here to meet with you as needed tonight and beyond. And I hope that what we've done in this outline really begins to frame the long-term fiscal plan that will go with our comprehensive wastewater management plan and the critical fiscal policy that needs to accompany that. And so I'll turn this over to Mark in a minute, but we both want to say thank you for holding this special town council meeting regarding the financial planning for the CWMP. Now, we've embarked on the state review process right now by filing our environmental impact report with MEPA. And then we'll be proceeding to the Cape Cod Commission thereafter for an approval of our compliance with the regional policy plan and the 208 plan. We continue to design, permit, and construct many of the aspects of the early phases of phase one that we'll be talking with you in a minute to the tune of almost $20 million worth of ongoing effort toward our phase one of our comprehensive wastewater management plan. We will be looking at putting pipe in the ground, hopefully, by late spring or shortly thereafter of 2021. So it's imperative that we have this long-term financial plan that's understood and supported by our community, and that we encode through clear fiscal policy with our town council. Tonight, we will continue this discussion of fiscal policy. We hope to follow this meeting with the introduction of a sewer assessment ordinance at your next town council meeting for a first read. We're developing a homepage link on our website that will allow our residents, when they go in, not to have to dig through the many layers of our website, but they can go in and they'll be able to look at, water quality in Barnstable. And they'll be able to access all sorts of information relevant to this vital resource, including the comprehensive wastewater management plan and all of the presentations and all of the report and all of the backup information, including links to simple inquiries like, am I going to get sewered? Am I included in one of these three phases? When might I get sewered? What is the fiscal policy and what are the estimated costs that are associated with this when this occurs? So that is all under development, and we expect to be rolling that out, and I'll continue to brief you both through any special meetings, but certainly during regular communications as to our progress. So again, thank you very much for holding this special meeting. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Mark Milne.
Thank you. Councilor Bogan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, Mark. I did have occasion to look through the presentation earlier today, and I want to be respectful of Mark as he goes through it. Do you want us to ask questions as we go along if we have them, or would you prefer that we wait until you were finished?
I think if it's if it's a fundamental question that probably many of you might have, I'm comfortable with Mark, you'll be watching the council, and if it's something, we'll base it on your judgment certainly, but ask it. But otherwise, if it can wait and doesn't get lost in there's a large volume of information here. So if you feel no, we need to resolve this now. We're right at the close of talking about sewer assessments. And I know you're going to go into another subject because I've looked at your slide. I would, and I believe Mark would want you to ask the question during that relevant portion of the presentation.
Okay,
and then we'll be here as long as you need afterward.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. Mark, are you out there?
Uh-oh, Mark left us.
Maybe he disagreed with me.
I will go get him. I believe he's in the waiting room.
Oh, okay.
And thank you all councilors for coming this evening. I think we're all, Councilor Neary is still not with us.
I just texted him, Councilor Neary. and he said he can't get on.
Oh. Thank
I'm sending him a new link.
Okay.
thank you for doing that. I couldn't get on it first either, so,
About that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
My microphone wasn't working, so. All right, are we ready to go?
Yes, sir. I turned it over to you, Mark, and, said certainly at the council's discretion, they can ask questions during or post-presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep.
And again, thank you, counselors, and good evening. Thank you, Manager Els, and good evening, town staff present here tonight. I'm going to share my screen. Sarah will let me. Sarah, is Sarah there? I have.
Oh, shoot. I got to re-give you the credentials to share screen. Can you go back out and then I can give you that and then you just got to come back in. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Okay, third time's a charm. Okay. All right, so a few times now, I have mentioned that we haven't committed ourselves beyond our current capacity with the existing resources that we've dedicated to this program. So the first couple of slides I'm going to present to you tonight kind of goes over that a little bit, explaining that in more detail, what I mean by that. So as you know, we've created a special revenue fund through special legislation, which we call the Sewer Construction and Private Way Maintenance and Improvement Fund. And that ended fiscal year 2020 with a balance of $19.9 million in it. 4.4 million of that is dedicated to existing cash appropriations, which remain outstanding and that we're currently working on. And we also have $11.6 million of borrowing authorizations outstanding that we plan on borrowing this fiscal year, for which the loan payments on those borrowings will come from this fund. Our revenue projected in this fund is we're projecting it to drop from $3 million to $2 million this year, and that's due to COVID, because the revenue sources in this fund consist of meals and rooms taxes. However, we're projecting that to recover in fiscal year 22 back up towards the $3 million level, which is where it has been for the past several years. So our projected fund balance at the end of this fiscal year is about $17 million. And here is a 10-year cash flow projection of this special revenue fund using the existing resources that we have dedicated for this program or into this fund. So again, fiscal year 21, we're projecting the fund balance to end up around $17 million. And then in fiscal year 22, down under the commitments, we have some new commitments being introduced into this fund. The first one being the estimated loan payments on that $11.6 million that we plan on issuing. And then we're starting to staff up our public works operation for the staffing needs that they're going to require to implement this program. And that'll happen over the next several years, starting in fiscal year 22, 23, 24, 25, until we're fully staffed up with the resources that they need to manage this major capital program. And as you can see in this projection, with the existing resources that we've dedicated, which consist of hotel and motel taxes, meals taxes, and short-term rental taxes that will be introduced beginning in fiscal year 2023, we can manage all of those commitments. We are within the annual resources dedicated to this into this fund with those commitments built in, resulting in about a slight increase in the fund balance from year to year going forward. So that's what I mean by we haven't overcommitted ourselves in this program to date. So the next thing I wanted to cover again was the why is it important to separate the costs for sewer assessments between general benefit facilities and specific or special benefit facilities. General benefit facilities are the types of infrastructure that we're going to be installing that can be allocated to a larger number of property owners or sewer units because they service a larger number of properties. They ultimately carry sewage from smaller areas into larger areas and then back to the treatment facilities. And so those costs typically get allocated out to a larger number of property owners because a larger number is partaking in that particular infrastructure or using that particular infrastructure. And these are things like trunk mains, force mains, land acquisitions that we might have to acquire, easements and rights of ways. Some properties that abut these main trunk lines will be able to connect directly into those trunk lines. In the specific or special benefit facilities are going to be the sewer mains that we install in the outlying neighborhoods that ultimately feed into these main trunk lines. And those types of sewer mains only get allocated to the direct property abutters, which have a lateral line tied into that main. So that's the difference between the two. We're going to be required to keep track of the infrastructure investments that we make for allocation cost purposes between the property owners. So this first map illustrates phase one, the first 10 years of our CWMP by project, by project that we anticipate to implement. Each color represents a different implementation within that 10-year period. Also included in this map is the general benefit infrastructure, which is represented by those purple lines. Those are the main sewer lines or trunk mains and force mains that we anticipate having to install in this phase. They also are represented by the yellow squares are the general benefit pump stations that we plan on installing. Now, these are conceptual at this point. These aren't potentially the exact locations. A lot more engineering needs to take place to figure out where exactly pump stations are going to need to go. But this is generally in the areas that we think today that they might be needed. And so those purple lines and those yellow squares represent those general benefit facilities that we anticipate installing that will be allocated out to a larger number of property owners because they're going to service a larger number of property owners. The green lines that you see on this map within each one of these shaded areas represent the specific, the main lines that are going to go right in front of properties that'll service just those neighborhoods and those properties. And the green squares represent the potential specific pumping stations that we may need in those areas, and the cost of those will be only allocated to the property owners that are part of that pumping area. This next map shows the breakdown between the general and special benefit facilities within that first 10-year phase, which is highlighted in this red shaded area. The darker red being the areas that we think will be serviced by these general benefit facilities mainly, and the lighter red shaded areas will be serviced by these specific benefit facilities. And so when you get into the lighter shaded red areas, those areas, their costs included in their assessments can include a portion of that cost to build the darker the general benefit facility infrastructure included in the darker shaded red area, as well as the specific benefit facility infrastructure that is included in the lighter shaded red area. The areas shaded in green and yellow represent phase 2 and phase 3 of the CWMP. And you can see we've overlaid the what we anticipate to be the general and specific benefit facility infrastructure needed in those areas. Okay, so here's an example of a general benefit facility infrastructure that we currently have underway. We plan on installing a $19,000 of linear feet of gravity sewer along Strawberry Hill Road and Phineas Lane, which is the same route that Vineyard Wind is taking. We also plan on installing 9,300 linear feet of sewer force main along Strawberry Hill Road. And that is infrastructure that's going to serve several different areas. And it's an example of a general benefit facility installation. You'll notice there's a pumping station down here at Coble's Beach. And now we're thinking about moving it over here at the left-hand turn up to Strawberry Hill Road. We're working on the possibility of being able to do that. So again, that's it. I tell you that because that's that the caution I placed on identifying on those previous maps that I illustrated the pumping station locations. They're all conceptual at this point. They can change. And this is a good example of that happening. So this, drilling down a little bit further, this is the potential area that can be serviced by that general benefit facility that we're going to install along Strawberry Hill Road and Phineas Lane. Ultimately, the sewage that we collect in all of these shaded areas will eventually feed into that infrastructure. And so the potential of us having to cost out the cost of that building that infrastructure to all of these properties exists, and that's over 2,000 properties. So what's the first decision that we need to make? The sewer assessment amount and the general fund contribution, or the general fund contribution, because the decision we make, whether regarding as to what the sewer assessment amount is going to be and the general fund contribution, one of them impacts the other. So which one do we decide to determine what the appropriate level is first? And as over 11,000 property owners are going to potentially be impacted by a sewer assessment, I think the best way to move forward is to determine what that sewer assessment is going to be. We need to consider the issues of equity and affordability when considering what that should be, and to start thinking about that, what that number should be. Here's an example of some information we've been provided by the Barnstable County Wastewater Task Force, which illustrates the average cost to replace an existing Title V system on the Cape, which is about a $13,000 capital cost, annual operation and maintenance cost of $165, with an equivalent annual cost of $1,210. And that uses a 20-year amortization on that capital cost at a 5% interest rate. Now, a nitrogen removing system would cost more, $22,400, and would have a higher annual operation and maintenance cost for a total equivalent annual cost of about $3,200. However, a nitrogen removing system that's TMDL compliant would cost $28,000, and it has a significantly higher annual and operation maintenance cost. And the equivalent annual cost of such a system is about $6,100. So there's some examples to think about when determining what's an appropriate sewer assessment level that we should be including in this program. And I've provided a link down here to that report. So here's our first decision point. What should the sewer assessment be? And should there be a dollar cap on that assessment? If so, what do we consider to be equitable and affordable? Keeping in mind that the full impact to the property owner can include that assessment, a connection cost, a systems development charge, an annual utility bill, a possible cost to abandon their existing system, and possibly having to replumb their home on the interior. We also need to consider the benefits to the property owners as part of this program. The cost avoidance and on-site pumping and maintenance that they currently have to do, the depreciation on an existing on-site septic system that they have, the catastrophic failure of that system, what that would mean, a cost avoidance of that expensive TMDL compliance system, and the probable increase in market value and marketability to the homeowner once they're tied into a public sewer system. So here's an example of what sewer assessments would look like based at different levels and what the annual amount, the annual payment that would be necessary that's added to the tax bill. This assumes that we allow them to amortize that sewer assessment over a 30-year period. And this illustration is at a 4% interest rate. This could be a maximum assessment that we charge homeowners, adjusted annually for inflation. Some of these assessments that we have may calculate to be less than this maximum amount that we set, because if you live along a main trunk line, that cost of that main trunk line is going to be shared amongst a lot more property owners, and so the assessment may not reach that cap that we set for those particular property owners. And again, keep in mind the equivalent annual cost for a TMDL compliance system is about $6,100 a year. Where here it's about $1,000 a year, plus those other costs that we need to consider: connection, utility charges, and so forth. Our recommendation right now, as a starting point for a conversation, is to think about a $17,000 sewer assessment level. Second decision point is that interest rate that we're going to charge on the assessments for anybody that wants to apportion that assessment over multiple years of future tax bills. Now, the town can apply a flat 5% rate, or we can assess a rate that's 2% more than the rate that we incur on the borrowing to construct the project. Our recommendation is to set that rate at 2% above the town's borrowing rate for constructing that project. That treats everyone as part of the program in the same way. Here's the table over here illustrates what the rates could be based on different town borrowing rates. The next decision point is, what are we going to do with that connection program? We could include the construction contract, could include the cost of connecting all the properties as we're in there building the sewer mains. We can include that cost in the bids that we solicit. We would have to identify the cost of each connection individually, because they're going to be different by property, and each property is going to have to be assessed their share of the cost of connecting their property. And there could be obstructions on that property, making it more costly than other properties. We would need the homeowner's consent to do this. A homeowner may want to contract for themselves to do the connection. So we would have to work with the homeowners to allow us to get in there to do that connection at the time of the sewer installation. If we do this, we can then include the cost of the connection with the assessment and allow the homeowner to amortize that cost over up to 30 years as well. And our recommendation is to include the cost of the connection in the construction project, offering the opportunity for the homeowner to add that to the sewer assessment and amortize it over a 30-year period, and because there's no out-of-pocket cost to the homeowner doing it this way. The next decision point will be whether or not we implement a systems development charge. This is a fee that's typically charged in the utility industry to recoup some of the costs that we've incurred to build the backbone of that system and previous investments that we made. As we tie people into the sewer system, the public sewer system, they're consuming some of that capacity that we've created, and the systems development charge recognizes that consumption as a one-time charge. You only pay this once, and it's at the time of connection, and we're recommending a $1,600 one-time charge that gets adjusted annually based on the rate tool that we currently use. The next decision point then is, what if any, will there be for a general fund contribution? And there are three approaches that we can take to implement this. We could seek an authorization from the community to create a municipal purpose stabilization fund that's financed with a property tax override, or we could seek authorization from the community for a debt exclusion override to raise the funds necessary to pay the annual debt service cost on the borrowings that we conduct to fund the design and construction of this program. Or we can allocate the existing tax levy dollars by reducing the existing operating and capital budgets. So there's three different ways we can implement a general fund contribution. Our recommendation is to go with the debt exclusion override. I think many taxpayers are much more familiar with this option. We just recently had one of these approved for Cape Cod Tech Regional High School for their construction. We've done them in the past for the Barnstable High School expansion and renovation, as well as the Barnstable Intermediate School renovations. So I think these are familiar to the community much more than a municipal purpose stabilization fund override. This requires a vote of the community authorizing those loan payments on the borrowings to be added to the tax levy every year. It's a 2/3 vote of the council to place a question on a ballot. The tax levy lasts as long as that loan is amortized. Once the loan is paid off, it goes away. There's no annual action that is required by the town council subsequent to approval by the community. And the town clerk would need approximately 60 days to prepare for an election. Here's a sample ballot question for a debt exclusion override, and it would read something like this. Shall the town of Barnstable be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Proposition 2 1/2 so-called the amounts required to pay for the principal and interest and related interest on the bonds issued in the aggregate principal amount of, and pick a number, here I have 150 million, in order to design and construct the expansion of the public sewer system as outlined in the town's comprehensive wastewater management plan. So that's the type format of the question that would go before the voters, and it needs a majority vote. The benefits to this approach is solidifies the funding for the program for the first several years, depending upon that amount that we request, preserves our existing services that we provide to the community, and preserves our budget flexibility. The support of the community to fund the program in this fashion is viewed favorably by bond rating agencies. And it offers the opportunity to gradually increase the tax levy as those loans are issued over a period of time and the additional debt service cost is added to the tax levy. And here's an example of what that would look like. For the next 5 years, we have about $173 million of capital improvements associated with the CWMP. Assuming a 12% principal subsidy on that capital investment, we would need to borrow about $153 million over the next 5 years. As we implement this program and we borrow the money to do the construction, we'd be issuing a new loan every year over the next 5 years. Year one, we'd issue about 24 million. Year two, it's only about 1.5. Year three, it's about 30 million. Year four, 20 million. And year five, it's 77 million. So over a 5-year period, we would issue that $150 million of loans. Each one of those loans would have a loan payment. Year one's loan payment is estimated to be around 1.1 million with a 2% interest rate. Year two is about 66,000. Year three is 1.3 million. Year four, 902,000. And year five, 3.4 million. So by the time we're up to year five, we have cumulative loan payments added to the tax levy of $6.8 million. You can see the tax rate impact year to year gradually grows from 7 cents in year one and year two to 15 cents in year three to 21 cents in year four to 43 cents by year five. And by year five, the tax bill impact on a median assessed value home in town is about $166, or about 45 cents a day. So that's how a debt exclusion would work. As we issue those loans and those new loan payments come on the books, we would add that additional amount to the tax levy every year. So what could we do to help offset that impact to our primary homeowners? We could adjust the residential exemption to offset that, essentially, by increasing the residential exemption 1%, which currently sits at 20%. Every 1% increase in the residential exemption saves a residential primary resident homeowner at the median value of $388,000, about $37. So if we were to increase it gradually from 20% to 25% by year 5, that'll save primary homeowner about $187 a year, or completely offset the cost of that annual debt exclusion. The council can go as high as 35%, which would offer up to $600 of tax savings to a median assessed valued home, which could then, that could be used to help offset some of that cost of that sewer assessment and other costs that might be added to their tax bill. So finally, other funding options, which we can discuss, which we haven't brought forward a recommendation on yet, but require further discussion. We still have available to us other excise taxes. I imagine at some point in the future, this issue will be brought before the community again in the form of the marijuana excise. However, that program, reason why I'm not bringing forward a recommendation on that yet is, well, there's a lot of reasons, but if we implement that, we're probably going to need the revenue generated by that to offset the cost of regulating that. And secondly, we could redirect a portion of the community preservation funds. Now, the CWMP itself is not an eligible program under the existing Community Preservation Act. This is currently a surcharge of 3% on your real estate tax bill every year. This is like an override, an approved override by the community. It's been on the tax bills for over 20 years now. And every 1% generates about $1.3 million a year. So if the community were to authorize an override, we could offset that additional taxing authority by a reduction in the amount of surcharge that we assess for the community preservation fund. But that requires several procedures that we would have to follow through in order to implement something like that. But it is an option, and other communities are taking a look at that as well. So that completes my presentation, and we can open it up for questions now.
Okay, so councilors, anyone have questions to direct to Director Milne or to Town Manager Ells? Okay.
I have a question.
Councilor Neary, then Councilor Steinhilber.
Thank you, Mark, for formulating this pretty heavy, informative packet that you have. A couple just quick questions, and I guess they're general questions. It appears in the presentation, the possible startup cost might be roughly $17,000, then a one-time $1,600 connection fee. I apologize. A $1,600. I guess it's a one-time charge for. I guess it's system development, and then you've got in addition to that, there's going to be a connection charge as well. So just trying to get my brain around the potential for what the cost could be for people that are connecting to this. So I know properties vary in proximity to where these lines will be. I assume that there'll be contractors out there that will maybe, whether they're private or whether we do it via the town, to try to establish what fixed costs might be. But ultimately, I would think the connection charges would not be inexpensive. Depending on proximity to these lines, they could run $2,000 to $20,000. So again, I'm just trying to get my brain around, has there been any math done to try to determine what maybe the average cost for the connection charge may be for the average resident that's hooking up?
No. Because it's going to vary by property. It's going to vary depending on how far you are from the road, whether your septic system is in front or back, whether your plumbing comes out significantly lower than the line in the road. Therefore, you might need some sort of pump to bring it up
Sure.
to the sewer in the road.
Yeah.
So no, we if it's a straightforward, it's in the front yard and your plumbing comes out the front of your house, yeah, you're talking thousands. When you go beyond that, no, we have not tried to go out and cost out. And at this point, really, there's no fiscal policy that would suggest that we should be doing that on private property. So, but we also recognize, and when I think about the various services that we offer, it's a little bit different because it's a pressurized system, but at Hyannis Water, we absolutely will hook up the customer or repair the connection. And so in discussing this with DPW and Mark Milne, we talked to bond counsel about, is the connection something that if we do it for the customer, they would be able to amortize over 30 years and include in the sewer assessment? And the answer was yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's completely up to the customer. But to answer your first question, no, because I could tell you $3,000, but if you're plumbing like my house, it comes out the back of the house and it's about 20 feet lower than the road, it's not going to be $3,000. So that it's going to vary house by house, plumbing and topography.
I am in the same boat that you are, Mark.
Yep.
Now, I just think that as we move forward in this process, with the thought in mind that should the council determine that we should bring this to a vote to the customer, these are kind of the gray areas that really people of the town need to have some form of access to. And I understand it's not the town's position to get kind of in that spot, in that middle area, but I wonder as this program rolls out, whether neighborhood by neighborhood, I mean, maybe this has to go to the private sector where they'll say, hey, we know houses on XYZ Street are set up in such a fashion that it's going to be $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever. Again, I just look at it more in terms of the difficulties in presenting it to the public, especially when we get into the discussion about putting it on a ballot question where it's really not the full picture. And I know you understand that. It's just, I guess it's a point in bringing it to light. It's not a full picture as to what the total cost could run per homeowner.
We could probably get an average like we did with Title V or an on-site nutrient removal system, an innovative system. We could probably get an average so people on average would have an idea. I mean, they'll know the assessment if there's a policy established here. They'll know the system development charge to buy into the system and invest in the infrastructure that we've already got in place. They'll have an average for connection. So I will through our staff and working with the county and beyond, if necessary, try to get that, Paul. I think that's probably the best we're going to do, because short of that, my inclination would be you got to go site to site, and with 11,000 properties, that's going to be difficult to do accurately. We can always tell you on an annual basis what it's about $400 a year, the annual bill for the for a residential customer on our current customer on our wastewater treatment facility. So you're sewered now, that's about what you pay.
Right.
Plus
I appreciate that. I think that would be valuable information coming forward. And I understand there'll be a lot of disclaimers that will be put forward in conjunction with that. It's a lot of ifs, but I do think that the public has to be at least offered a range, for lack of a better word, you know, a range, and not to make the process overwhelming, the DPW and the whole bit, but you know, it's kind of the 20% covers the 80% rule. You know, we're going to get to the point where we can figure within X number of feet of a main, it's going to kind of extrapolate out to 5,000, 3,000, 20,000, whatever, but the number will come through. So that would just be my thoughts on that. It's more of a total picture.
I'm hoping, it's our intent, that in the website we develop, we'll be able to provide those sorts of average representations of costs so that our resident can really get their arms around not just you know, the kind of the procedural legal side of this occurring, but certainly the financial side as well. You know, there's many aspects to this, and you know, but I think the day is coming very quickly on Cape Cod where Title V, I had this conversation yesterday. Title V systems and that $13,000 doesn't represent any nutrient removal.
That's correct.
And we are going to be held to those targets for those TMDLs in our bays. And all the water that falls on the Cape ends up in a bay somewhere. And so to say, well, I live 3 miles from the water, this doesn't apply to me, is not the case. It just takes longer to get from your location to the bay. So I think that those bigger numbers are something that if we're not moving with a sewer expansion plan in the appropriate locations, because innovative systems are absolutely part of this solution. But if we're not going to sewer for whatever barrier we hit, we are going to see those sorts of systems required. And then the resident will be on their own. And that's a completely private effort, the same as the Title V system is. So I think that's a reality also that needs to be shared that hasn't hit yet.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true.
So I think there's a lot we can do with the website to educate our resident and to provide them as much information as possible so that they can make good decisions about, you know, whether it's an override vote or whether it's, you know, just, geez, you know, do I need to replace my system and when should I do it? And, you know, all that comes with it.
Just a follow-up, if I may, Mr. President?
Yes.
I know I've spoken of this before. My opinion, where it is such a widely held concern for the Cape and Massachusetts and Cape Cod drives a lot of revenue that goes back to the state. So my hope and my thoughts are that there will be a time where grants and these things will come through. And I know it's difficult to develop a plan, but should there be some relief that comes down from the state or the feds regarding sewering, is there or will there be a process that can be set up to, lack of a better word, create a refund or create or because people they're gonna have a choice. They're either gonna go the tax route, put it on their tax bill, or B, they might just pay for it. And with the thought that there might be some possible relief that comes along, certainly not to pay for the whole thing, but some possible relief, I would think there's going to need to be some form of a mechanism to, if you've already paid for the system, you know, how do you reimburse that client if, you know, they ended up being a 10% kick-in from the state? I'm hoping, I'm optimistic that we'll see some of that, but I think that also has to be somehow incorporated into this plan.
I can try to answer, and certainly Mark and others may be able to add to it. But my experience has been we've gone the other way. When I first came into managing wastewater projects, there were two different programs, one for wastewater treatment and one for sewer expansion. and it was basically a 90% subsidy for wastewater and about a 50% subsidy for sewer expansion. And when all of that went away around 89, and by 91, pretty much across the country, we had loan programs, and they gave subsidized interest rates. Much of the opportunity to secure, on a long-term scale, not project by project, a long-term scale to secure some sort of subsidy for an effort like this, went away. Now, that's not saying that we're not in discussions. I am in discussions directly with state officials and our federal representation relevant to trying to secure funding. Exactly what you're saying. And maybe we can deliver it. And it depends on what conditions come with it when they deliver it. Is it project specific, or is it something else that would determine and give you your answer? Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's very difficult to be able to reimburse once these types of funds and once these obligations are established.
I agree.
So I think, I don't know if there's other, and if there is a way, Mark Milne will find it, but if there is a way to direct those funds so that they can help our resident, especially those who are in need of that support, we would pursue that, to its end, whether we could or we couldn't do it. And, but I think it's going to be difficult. I think that we've been put in a position, from a planning standpoint, the way we're looking at this is, and it's reflected in the presentation Mark's done, we've committed on the technical regulatory side to look at this in 5-year increments, even though it's a 30-year plan. We're going to do the same on the financial side. So if we see opportunities developing that would allow us to do this better fiscally, we're hoping we can make those modifications in those increments. Look at where we are 10 years after the last effort. We didn't have any of these funding mechanisms in place. And now we're able to, you saw the table that Mark showed out over the next 5 years. That was a wonderful, fiscally responsible effort by our town council and our town management to be able to get that in place. So who knows what 5 years from now might be. And that will be updated and reflected in the fiscal plan that's associated with the implementation of this capital effort. But again, once you have, Mark, am I correct that it's difficult to do that once you have these obligations in place?
Yes, we can't unwind any assessment that somebody has to pay, but what we could do if additional funding becomes available is unwind that debt exclusion override. We can take that additional funding that we receive and apply it against the debt service that was authorized for that override and not raise the additional debt service on the tax levy, thereby giving it back to the entire community, so to speak, in the form of a lower tax levy.
That would make sense. That would make sense. Well, let's hope for that.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilor Steinhilber, followed by Councilor Dagwan.
Thank you, Mr. President. You hit on some of what I was going to comment on, but I think in some of this, for council and for the public that's watching, timetable and prioritization of decisions we need to make, I think is important to sketch out as we go. For example, if we were to go with a ballot question, I know roughly we need about 60 days to kind of get that prep, but in reality, I would feel like we wouldn't really want to be putting anything forward until 2022 in that regard. Just with folks, we're kind of rebounding here. You want people to get their feet under them in 2021. Hopefully we get back to a sense of normalcy. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there in terms of wrapping our head around a timetable for some of these steps we may be taking. And the town manager also hit on the funding sources that we started working on several years ago to kind of bring us to this point. Will carry us for a while we're putting some of these steps in place. And I just think it's important to keep talking about timetable, best estimate of when the first houses will be hooked up to the system based on what's going in the ground starting April. Obviously, my precinct's in a little bit different situation than others because the April is my precinct with pipes, coming in the ground, and Councilor Atzelis, I think Councilor Hebert, that's kind of a lot of the first projects coming through that area. So I think it's important to keep educating the public on, when do we anticipate hookup, so people can start to wrap their head around. All right, I have 2 years, I got 3 years, I got 4 years to kind of think about to know this is coming, and then also think about a potential ballot question that might be coming. And another comment I'd just like to make that, when I believe it was 2006 when we had a ballot question before, that top line number was what people were talking about, and it was more than what we're talking about now. And I think that got an 87% no vote at the time. I know there was a lot of things wrapped into it, but I think really breaking it down like you did, Mark, the cost per day, cost per quarter, getting people to help them wrap their minds around that cost, because sometimes that top line cost, the number gets so big, it kind of loses its perspective, if you will. So that's really going to be important going forward. So just some general comments there as we're going through this to keep talking about timetable, and how we're going to prioritize some of these steps, just, for us and also for the public to know that it's not all going to be decided by New Year's Eve and there's going to be a ballot question in March. I want people to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Gagwan, please.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor Steinberg answered the question that I was going to ask about the time frame for an override. If we're going to do an override, it seems to me that's something we need to be focused on, get moving. If people agree, moving quickly on that, so let's move forward. So he answered that question that I had. Can the town is going to do the connections? Can an individual property owner do their own connection? Or would they have to go through the town?
They can choose.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Cullen, please.
Yes, I have a few observations, questions. The first one would be an observation that it seems to me that the sale happens with the comparative graph that you put up about cost with removing the nitrogen loading and with regard to replacing a septic in a Title V versus hooking up to sewer. So I really think that that is, as Councilor Steinhilber said, that is the ultimate evidence that in the end it's going to be a cost benefit. And I just think that I have concerns about how it's going to be communicated to people, because what happens if the override fails?
You asking me that?
Yeah, I'm asking. What happens if that?
Mark Milne and I and staff sit back down and we look at the option that we're not recommending, which is to reduce our operating and capital budget, and therefore cut services and programs and cut an already challenged capital program. Because this is kind of at the core of our mission and the reason why we live on Cape Cod. And so we need to proceed on a societal level, but a regulatory level as well, in addressing these issues. And so I believe that we recognize the prioritization of this, and if an override fails, we're going to regroup and we're going to come back to you and show you what it means to cut millions of dollars out of the operating budget.
So is that part of the presentation that you give to the public then, when you show them the cost benefit analysis of that slide that I was just talking about with removing nitrogen from your septic, all the costs added up? I mean, I think it's absolutely imperative we communicate that, because the taxpayer is already burdened now with the debt exclusion for the tech. and I noticed a substantial increase in my taxes over that. And I'm sure all of us did. So, if as we keep adding and adding and adding, and then we talk about adding more and more and more, like I understand Councilor Neary's point of like, what is the total cost? Because there's this and there's that and there's this and there's that and there's all these columns that you add up to find out your total cost. So when people hear all of those different things, there's a sticker shock, I think, that happens. So I guess the communication piece is to help people understand that, number one, it is absolutely necessary because of where we live, and our economy depends on it, and our livelihood depends on it, and our drinking water depends on it, and all these other things. But also that there's a benefit to you cost-wise to suck it up and do it anyway. I'm just worried about the message, I guess, because if it fails, we see projects and programs cut at the HYCC and at the senior center and at the beaches. And I mean, the ultimate cost to the town could be crippling if we don't have public support for this. So I guess the real thrust of what I'm trying to say is that I'm very interested in seeing how robust we can be with communicating this to people and getting people on board. So has that started with civic associations? Is that part of the plan?
Absolutely. It's going to start with we've already been out there discussing the technical aspect of what we're doing. And depending on the fiscal policy that we agreed to proceed with, we will begin discussing the fiscal plan. But we don't want to go out and talk about a fiscal plan and then change fiscal policy after we've already, you know what I mean? That happened 10 years ago, and that was not the way to do it.
But questions that some people will be like, I just put a new septic in. What happens? Right. I just spent 20 grand doing blah, blah, blah. What about that? There'll be a lot of that sort of individual questions that will, I know how the court of public opinion works firsthand. So, if we're not addressing those individual needs kind of in a one-off basis, then I think we're going to lose a lot of ground where we could very easily gain it. It's also actually an opportunity to cast the net far and wide to increase civic association participation beyond, for instance, in my precinct, beyond the property owners that maybe live along the coastline, and to get others on board too. Because there's a whole community of renters out there too that aren't property owners that will pay the burden of these taxes in their rent, that may or may not be behind it, may or may not understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's a big opportunity where we could loop people in and really let them know where they are in the town and how important this particular thing is for us as a town. So I have a lot of questions about that I can talk to you later about as far as outreach is concerned, but I remain incredibly concerned about outreach because it's an opportunity it's either an opportunity or not, and I really feel like we need to beef up our communication if we plan on having this be a successful launch.
Well, I agree. And we've brought in two different public relations firms that are assisting us now.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. And we are going to develop the website. And again, the technical regulatory side of this, we've been out in the community talking about now for several years.
Yep.
We first need to establish fiscal policy with our town council, and then Mark Milne and I will engage in the broader discussions with our civic associations. But I think it's a mistake to go out there without that clear fiscal policy and talk about how we're going to do this, and then in the worst case have it reversed mid-project, and nobody benefits from that. It creates major confusion. And certainly I am always available, Jen, to sit and talk and hear your thoughts. You're the most recent you're the most recent recipient of direct involvement on this issue, and so your experiences and your insight are invaluable.
And that's really why I'm pushing so hard for the community.
I understand.
And because I still hear about it, even though we have conversations about it all the time as to what a success it was. There are still people that feel that that's not the case.
Yes.
And I mean, opinion is opinion, right? But one other quick question. Thank you for addressing all those issues. As I think I remember the marijuana tax, that money had to be used in particular toward marijuana enforcement and programs about that. So could that money even be used for this purpose, Mark? The excise from that?
There is a host, like similar, I think it's called like a host community agreement. In addition, you can negotiate a community agreement in addition to the tax.
But weren't those the ones that were formulated in Wellfleet, for instance, weren't they all pulled back and scrutinized and the AG got involved? I think there was a whole big deal about how those were not sound because the community had jacked the fees up so high that, so that's kind of a slippery slope as well.
Yeah, that's why we're not bringing forward a recommendation to introduce that as a funding source for this program.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilor Steinhilber, followed by Attorney Nova, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Councilor Culliman mentioned. I know we touched on a little bit at the last meeting, but in terms of people putting new septic systems, in the ground right now, I definitely talked to folks out along with Pocket Lake that, put in very expensive systems, recently. Conversations I've had over the last several years, but I know the town manager and DPW director Santos are working with the Board of Health to really start cataloging systems that are failing, systems that need to go on the ground, because there's certain areas where we might know that, we're probably going to be connecting your house in 2023 or 2024. Can we stretch it out just a little bit longer so you're not getting hit twice? And then there's a policy that, we can make along with the Board of Health too. What's the standard time for you to hook up once it becomes, live on your street, for lack of a better word, but ready to go? Do you have 36 months to connect? Obviously, if you're working with the town and the town's doing it for you, it's probably quicker, but maybe there's some type of an exemption we put in that you have, if you've had a new system put in within the last 10 years of your street becoming available, that you get, 5 years before you need to connect, just to kind of give people some of their money back, because a lot of people are putting quite a bit into the ground. So I appreciate Councilor bringing that up, and town manager and DPW director working, diligently with the Board of Health. That's a really important question that we need to get on top of, right now, because that can kind of run away from us, and that'll cause a lot of public. So thank
you. Attorney Nova, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention to Councilor Cullum's point about communication that we do need to be careful because we're not allowed to use public resources to advocate for a ballot question. So I'll be providing some guidance to the council on that. It doesn't mean you can't have meetings and discuss the issue, but the use of public resources is prohibited. It's a campaign finance law. So I just wanted to mention that we need to keep those things in mind.
I think it's important as well to Eric's point and Jen's. We did put in place a working relationship with our new customers when we did the last sewer expansion, especially when they had just invested in an on-site system, so that they would be granted extended time to connect. We would certainly want to try to avoid asking our residents to make substantial improvements if we knew that the sewer was going to be coming into their area in the relatively near future. Longer term, we'll have to come up with some equitable ways because, these are our customers no matter. Well, number one, they're our residents. Number two, they're already our customers because when they pump their septic tank, they bring it to us, even though most people don't really think about that. Number two, they're going to become our sewer customer. So it is absolutely imperative that we develop a trust and an equitable relationship from day one. There's lots of issues that will come with this that we're not even talking about, like what happens when there's a power outage and the resident has a pump and they only have 72 hours capacity on their lot. We need to have plans in place that we're there to help our residents and now our sewer customers. And that's the intent of what we're going to do. I think more broadly, there's another, in parallel with this, there's going to be this discussion going on with the Board of Health, not only to provide a database to the Board of Health of what phase one, year one 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through this 10-year phase one, what we are intending to do in each of those phases. So when somebody comes in, an applicant comes in, one of the first things they do is say, oh, geez, is this in the future sewer area? And if it is, how can we work with this resident so that we help them to minimize these improvements, yet protect public health and safety? The other discussion that's going on with the chair of the Board of Health is related to the slide Mark showed you earlier, and it's got to do with nitrogen-sensitive areas, and I use the acronym TMDL, and that's really talking about the total daily nitrogen limit. The total nitrogen daily limit. Thank you. Sorry. And what that means is
Total maximum.
that's how much nitrogen can go into the system, and above that level, it's causing a detrimental impact. It's basically deteriorating our saltwater bays to the point where at times the upper reaches are void of life. So that is a point we never want to be at, and we already are. And that is a deterioration that we don't want to see continue. And it is. Because Title V systems are the primary, urine is the primary source of nitrogen. Title V systems do nothing to remove the nitrogen that's entering our system and going through our groundwater to the bay. So we've got to look with our Board of Health to either sewer or to make nitrogen sensitive designations to stop this fertilizer that is creating these problems, because that's basically what it is. It's just getting hit with heavy loads of nitrogen beyond its ability to carry that nitrogen. Okay, that's what we're challenged with here. So this is coming, and it's either going to come upon us and we won't have a plan, or it'll come to us and we will be implementing a plan. And at this point, I think Mark and I feel fairly confident that this is achievable. There's an excellent question about, well, what happens if you don't get the debt exclusion? But I've given you the answer, and that's going to be very difficult. Our biggest departments are our schools, police, and public work. So when you're looking for millions of dollars to be cut, it's not going to be, they're sure it'll hit everybody, but that's where the significant dollars are in our municipal budget.
Councilor Snap, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mark and Mark, for the presentations thus far. Just some very practical questions, and this is both to educate me and our listeners. What is the percentage vote for the debt exclusion? Is that a 2/3?
It's a 2/3 for the council to place it on a ballot, but then it's just a majority vote of the
The
community.
majority vote for the debt exclusion. And then for the ordinance that is being proposed, and we'll have a first reading next week, is that a majority vote for that ordinance of council?
I'll defer to Attorney Nober. I believe an ordinance requires 2/3.
I'm actually going to have to double check that.
Okay.
Let me check.
And assuming that that the ordinance includes a number of the recommendations that you've been presenting tonight, if it's 2/3 and we didn't pass it, I guess I hope we're not restricted to that 2-year rule that is maybe just for zoning amendments, that it wouldn't apply to a general ordinance. Because
that is just for zoning.
Just for zoning. Okay, great. Because again, I think we're going to be asked in the next few weeks, months, to be making some, challenging decisions here, and that, making that marker in the sand, if it's $17,000, which I think has been, you've made some very good points to that. Do we move it down? Do we move it up? I think that everything moves when you do that. Something to think about.
The ordinance, Councilor Schnapp, the ordinance that we'll be bringing forward is reflective at this point, pending the outcome of tonight or future night discussions. It is reflective of what Director Milne has presented.
Okay, so it'll pretty much embody what has been put forth tonight.
Yes.
I just, since I have the floor for a minute, I just had a question, a little more questions on that connection cost to the homeowner. I'm assuming if the town takes on that role, then that'll be at public construction costs. So it'd probably be a little bit more expensive, but the benefit would be that you would have the opportunity to amortize those costs over 30 years. That's sort of a trade-off for the homeowner.
Kind of like what, well, Mark can answer the latter question, but it's what the market will bear in a public bid. So, you know, and again, the home, maybe we can do some sort of scenario where we have prices kind of along the lines of what Councilor Neary was suggesting, but we could have kind of groupings of prices. So the resident would say, okay, they went out to bid, here's what it costs to connect, we have these contractors, and know that, okay, if we use the municipal cost, contractor, it's gonna cost $5,000 for what I have. And I've gone out and shopped it and I can do it better. So I'm just gonna pay for it myself and I'll connect myself. But to try to offer as much service to our customer and to try to offer that service, not just in the construction or technical support, but also financially. And so that's why we pursued this. So if somebody says, hey, I'm going to put it all into a 30-year betterment at 2%, and I'm going to pay it back that way, the way to do that is that we will have to do the connection. Otherwise, that's not an option. But it's your choice on that one.
Mm-hmm.
That is the benefit to the homeowner. They don't have to be the general contractor. They don't have to administer this, go out and try to hire somebody on their own, come up with the money out of their pocket, whether they refinance, pull it out of their savings. This allows them a worry-free or management-free kind of alternative. And who's maybe perhaps when we do a connection program down the street, you know, the economy of scales take place. Yeah, we are subject to prevailing wages where an individual homeowner is not, but we have the equipment mobilized. We're doing perhaps 50 to 100 connections under one contract. We may be able to achieve a better price than they could as a result of that.
Thank you. Madam Vice President, and then Councilor Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mark Milne and Mark Ells. I'm happy we're discussing this finally, and we're seeing all the pieces of this puzzle come together. And I'll tell you, I'd much rather spend my tax dollars improving water quality than spending it on paying lawyers to defend our right to be able to do this. But just a couple of things. Councilor Steinhilber mentioned the fact that to hit our taxpayers in this fiscal year is going to be tough. How long could we defer putting a debt exclusion on a ballot? And Councilor Steinhilber mentioned 22. I'm not sure if he meant fiscal year 2022 or the actual calendar year of 2022, but how long could we defer action on debt exclusion, Mark? No.
Yeah, it really depends on how aggressive we go forward with additional project appropriations. Everything that we have appropriated to date, including that $11.6 million of borrowing authorization that's outstanding right now that we plan on borrowing this year, can be provided for within our existing funding stream. And that trust fund still has over $20 million in it, so we could absorb some more projects within that existing funding stream, buying us some additional time. So I would think we would have a year, maximum 2, but it depends on how aggressive we come forward with additional project appropriations.
Okay, thank you for that. And it's interesting, your recommendation for the debt exclusion is a one-time vote of the council, but then some other tools, for instance, the residential exemption, is something that's voted on annually by the town council. So one year could be 20, or we could change that to 35% the next year, or depending on the will of the council. So that's a fluctuating or an unknown entity. So the other thing that was mentioned was about giving the homeowner the opportunity to connect on their own. And I know with regards to Stewart's Creek, we put in, the infrastructure there, and there are still some homes that have not connected. I would say that this ordinance that is coming forward is not going to speak to or have mentioned in it about a mandatory time frame to connect. When you start, putting in the infrastructure, and then someone doesn't want to hook up, or they say, no, I'm not going to participate, I can't afford it right now to do it on my own, are we going to mandate time on that?
I think the authority for that currently, and I'd have to defer to Karen, but I believe it falls under our Board of Health. And under our Board of Health, they do have the ability to grant waivers. And I believe that the people who haven't connected do come in and on some time increment ask to continue that waiver of connect. So I think it would be a combined effort unless there's some legal mechanism to have a requirement outside of the authority that our Board of Health. I don't know that specific answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ordinance could mandate connections, and I would assume within a certain time frame, but I think we do have to take another look at the intersection with the Board of Health and be clear as to where our authority is. Just to circle back on the ordinance question, it's a majority vote for the ordinance. Borrowings require a 2/3 vote.
So right now, the Board of Health, Mark Ellis, educate me on this. The Board of Health, if someone's system is failed, and if it's in the area that is slated to be connected or sewered, the infrastructure put in place within the year, are they putting tight tanks in and taking that to our water pollution control, or are they working with a failed system, or how are they addressing that at Board of Health?
At this point, it isn't a front and center issue because we're just embarking on this. They have both the health director and the chair of the Board of Health have met with myself and staff, and they're absolutely willing to do everything they can to keep the resident in. And I think Tom McKeon used an example of Norris Street, of being able to do some very interim solutions if sewer is imminent and planned. Not just planned, but imminent, meaning funded and you're ready to go. It's just a matter of it's not in the ground yet. And they've worked with residents to keep them in there. I can't really speak to private financing and whether that interim solution would allow transfer of property. I can't answer that question. I would defer to maybe some sort of legal counsel. No, I'm not asking Karen to answer that right now, but I'm just saying I think that would be a discussion that would need to take place. Because it is an interim solution. So if you were the buyer, what would you think of that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Never mind, is it legal or not? Charlie, are you here to answer that question?
Not sure I dare dip my toe into this, but until a few years ago, DEP did not allow for the tight tanks and has now rethought that position. As we look at this entire subject with Board of Health and DPW and our department, we're going to have to look at funding mechanisms that might make some use of funding for tight tanks and bill backs for the use of those tight tanks during a period of time. But it's certainly one possibility that until very recently wasn't available to us, but it might help bridge the gap for some property owners who have failing systems, don't want to spend that money up front, and then if they do spend it, they're then not contributing presumably for at least the period of the variance granted by the, or prospective variance granted by the Board of Health, which impacts Mark Milne's financial bottom line on this. We're relying on a projected income stream to support the system going forward, and to the extent that folks aren't hooking up, they're not paying into the system. So that's an issue that we need to be considering all aspects of. And I know that Mark was referring to that in the equity analysis that's got to be done here. But we do have some tools, and I think we need to be very creative in how we approach that transitional subject.
Thank you.
My most recent conversations with the chair of the Board of Health, and I will state that this is not the position of the total Board of Health. I've only been speaking with the chair, but myself and Director Santos are going to be regulars at Board of Health here forward, maybe for 30 years, if we're both still around. So, you know, he's very willing. It's not just a matter of immediate. He wants to know, he wants this map up there so he can go in with his board and say, okay, here's the property that's before us. And 3 years from now, if all goes the way the DPW has it planned, they're going to have sewer out there. And so what should we be doing with our resident relevant to this up? That's very much where our chair has suggested he would like to be able to go with discussion. And so obviously it would be the Board of Health that would ultimately make that decision. And we'll see how this unfolds in further discussion.
Thank you. And I feel good that we have a good team in management and in directors in the town. And I'm very confident that we'll get this through. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you very much, President Hebert. To Mark, I appreciate the fine presentation. I do remember voting for the Cape Tech override, but I can't remember how long it was. But if we are paying down on that debt and now taking on new debt, is there a way to dovetail that those diminishing and increasing expenses so that it's a less severe impact to the taxpayer?
Well, the Cape Cod Tech debt assessment, it can fluctuate from year to year depending upon our enrollment. For example, we had to add to the fiscal year 21 tax levy about $1.97 million for our share. The notice we just received from Cape Cod Tech this week says that that's going to go down to about 1.65 million because our percentage of enrollment in students out at that school was reduced. And so that's how that annual debt service gets allocated. It's based on the percentage of enrollment that each sending community has attending that school district. But your point being that if we have declining debt service coming off the debt exclusion and new debt service coming on, can they offset each other? And that's really what we started doing when the Barnstable High School and Barnstable Intermediate School loans came off the books 2 years ago. They matured and Cape Tech came in the year after. And so we had over $3 million of additional taxing authority coming off the tax levy, but we added back almost $2 million. So there was a net reduction of $1 million in the tax levy last year as a result of that change in debt exclusion authorization that we had. So going forward, there's an opportunity, perhaps, the same situation taking place as Cape Tech's debt starts to decline in the outer years. It's a 25-year amortization period. If we have declining student enrollments and as their debt payments are reduced every year, there is an opportunity for them to partially offset one another.
Any other councilor questions? Or comments? Councilor Shaughnessy.
Thank you, President Hebert. My question is along the lines of folks who've been recently upgraded, and that has to do with those of us who are currently sewered. Are we being assessed at all? Are we being assessed only the general benefit piece? And if so, will we get any upgrades? Those are the questions I have with regard to those of us who are currently sewered. The other question I have is where in some areas we're already over the total daily maximum load of nitrogen. If in some areas those are further out in the plan, are there other ways that we can incentivize people to reduce those loads in the meantime? Whether, and I don't even know if it's enough to make a difference, whether that's getting rid of their lawn, putting in a rain garden, reducing their stormwater runoff in other ways, just longer term things, because 30 years is a long time.
Good questions. To the latter question, everything matters. Every percentage reduction matters. And, I think the most effective way to do that is to educate. I actually, interestingly enough, have a meeting with the superintendent of schools tomorrow, and you're probably familiar that we embarked on an engineering technology program here in our public schools, and we have a meeting about that coming up next week as well. But she and I are going to meet tomorrow specifically to look at the new improvements, but also to talk about engaging our high school students in this. I think the educational process long term is key for people to understand, minimize lawn, to understand, minimize or eliminate use of fertilizers, to understand that the way we construct, there are best management practices that will help us to avoid additional nutrient load, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that is ongoing, and everything we can do to reduce every percentage, considering the entire south side of Cape Cod exceeds its nutrient loads, is well worth the effort. And it is ongoing on all fronts. We're developing a team between our reg services and our DPW and our planning and development departments that are holistically looking at the systems in our community to understand the natural functions of how water falling on the ground, moving through water bodies into our embayments, how that works. And is that working? Forget about all the new construction. Is that working as effectively as it could? Are we cleaning culverts and basins? And are we looking at land uses? And are we doing everything possible so this $1.2 billion challenge we have can be brought down? And can we see change over these 5-year increments so when we report out at the next update that we're able to say through innovative systems, through better management of turf, et cetera, we feel as though to meet our TMDLs, here's where we are. And perhaps we can avoid some costs long term. So that is ingrained in what we're doing. And we're looking at it not just as a public works department project. This is a priority for our municipality, and every single director and every single department is engaged in this effort. And you just hear it from Mark Milne and I tonight because we're talking about finance. Relevant to existing customers, you are always receiving improvements at our wastewater treatment plant. And you're going to be hearing about some in the coming weeks relevant to nitrogen load. To remain compliant, and in our case, we exceed the requirements of the regulators relevant to our discharge from that, is constantly ongoing. The general benefit assessment that we're talking about would be incurred by those people receiving the sewer expansion. So existing customers are not impacted by that. Part of the reason why we want to do a system development charge is we've already invested in a facility out there. That's a hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment between our treatment plant and our existing collection system. Within the treatment plant, we have capacity not only to treat what we currently serve, but we have capacity to treat phase one. So when you're being added to our treat as a customer, the system development charge is you paying for the fact that we're there for you now, so that our current customer doesn't carry that cost. So that's what we've been talking about, a system development charge. We've actually run it in our rate model now, and we're ready to move on it. And we are saying that, you know, at the fiscal year rate hearings, DPW are going to bring this forward with a recommended amount. The recommended amount is going to be $1,600 for a residential property when it connects. I'd have to have them equate out how that'll be applied to commercial. But all new customers would be paying into this investment that we've already made. So I'm not sure if does that answer the first part of your question?
That answers the first and second part very well. I want to say your estimate of annual sewer costs was right on the money. I don't think I've ever actually gone over $100 a quarter, generally right around the low 90s. $92 I paid last quarter, so it's a great thing.
And we'll try to make more treatment and keep those costs in check. That's absolutely part of what we do. So
thank you.
Yes. Mark, if I might, so if we back up to the critical decisions or direction that we'd like to get from the council tonight, you know, back on page 11 of your presentation, we were talking about we're going to bring forward a sewer assessment ordinance, but it really doesn't establish the dollar amount specifically at this point, does it?
Yes,
It will establish the dollar amount with that annual adjustment.
with an annual adjustment. Yes.
So we need to get feedback from the council as to how they feel about a dollar amount and the equitability and the fairness of what we're proposing. Is that the first decision point that we had asked the council to consider?
That's correct.
Okay, so right now we're telling you it's coming forward and that $17,000 number is in there. And we need to get feedback from you as to whether you feel as though, based on what we presented and some of the comparisons to on-site systems, whether that's something that we would want to bring to you in an ordinance. We have. I'll defer it back to President Hebert.
So, Councilor Shaughnessy, did you have a comment on this?
I was going to comment on it. I was going to say I definitely feel positively about that number, having I deal with a lot of residences that have never had their Title V done, where we are dealing with inspection, install, redesign. I think $17,000 to connect onto sewer, to me seems very reasonable. So I just wanted to say that I support that recommendation.
Thank you, Councilor. And Councilor Bogan?
Yeah, I agree with Councilor Shaughnessy. I mean, obviously, if you're affected by the surcharge, no amount is going to be palatable. But when you look at the array of options, this seems to be a reasonable, my word, compromise. And it's particularly given when considered against what the cost of putting in a new Title V system would be. So I agree with Councilor Shaughnessy.
Thank you. Councilor Neary, followed by Councilor Steinhilber.
Thank you. Clarification, just this sewer assessment would only apply to residents that are in the process of hooking up. Is that correct? In other words, it's not town-wide.
Correct. These are for our new customers. Yes.
I know that as I was thinking about this as it was coming along, there was some hope that I thought that maybe a math problem could be assigned to like property values, thereby the assumption being that the lower property value homes may get a lack of a better word, a sliding scale, but that probably, I would assume that would not pass legal four square. You could not, how do I put it? Lower costs for houses maybe under the median price and transfer that cost above. I assume that doesn't pass muster. Is that correct?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Again, just the rationale was folks on fixed incomes, folks in the lower financial spectrum in town, to give them a break on what the sewer assessment would be. But I figured that would not be a possible answer. But I thought I'd just bring it forward.
There needs to be uniform standards.
Thank you.
So still, Steinhilber.
Thank you, Mr. President. For a long time, for years and years, I've really advocated for having, a cost of something like this be really close in line with what a Title V costs, because people that own homes have already accepted that number. Not that they want to spend it someday, but they know they own the home at some point, probably going to have to replace your Title V. And in previous years, these numbers came in really ungodly high, and just no one could wrap their head around. In some previous meetings, we had talked about a $13,000 sewer assessment. So then you add all the add-ons, like a car sticker. You have your base price, and then there's all these add-on stickers. So the base price is really not the cost of the car. So the sewer assessment really is that base price, but then we got to add everything else in. So if you're at 17, I mean, you easily might be looking at, closer to $25,000 all in. So I just want everyone to think about that. Previously, at some meetings when we had a $13,000 assessment, it was all the add-ons, and it came in, if you had a fairly easy hookup, just under 20,000. And again, I get the value of, well, if you put in a nitrogen removing system versus this, but this history as a guide, that can easily get lost in the number. It's the big number that everyone's gonna hear. So it becomes really hard to educate that. So I think that top line number, we can't lose sight of the add-ons on top of the sewer. That's not an all-in cost. There's a lot more that goes on top of that. So we might want to think about lowering that a little bit to be closer to that $20,000 mark. That's my comment.
Back to Councilor Neary.
Thank you, Mr. President. And that's a very good point. As a follow-up to Councilor Steinhuber, Director Milne, what would that effect have in terms of staying ahead of the production costs going forward with a lower sewer assessment, saying that, $4,000 difference per hookup?
Well, what that will ultimately lead to is a higher general fund contribution. And so I think it's in the range of a couple of $1 million a year additional general fund contribution to make up for a lesser sewer assessment of that much.
Just as a follow-up, we had, up until COVID, fortunately, been building reserves in that general fund. So with that said, and with the hope that 21 brings better economies, better revenues, that whole bit, I think that I would concur to let's hope for a better day down the road, and if necessary, maybe have to lean on that general fund as this program kind of rolls out. That would just be my comment on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Cullum.
So the $17,000 that we would be agreeing upon, should we agree upon it, is for everyone, whether or not they're a resident, correct? It's for
These are for people that are gonna be, these are for people who have properties that are going to be sewered.
right, that are going to be sewered, that are not currently on sewer. Is there a way, I'm just asking because of the residential tax rate that we just adopted, is it an option to give homeowners that are permanent residents here an advantage while allowing summer residents, or kind of like move the needle the other way so that people who aren't year round here pay a different hookup?
You can't charge, there has to be uniformity in the assessment. You can't hire assessment to a second homeowner. The way you would accomplish something along those lines would be to change that residential exemption.
Right.
And you would want to do that following the approval, let's say, of a debt exclusion and the council agreeing to a ceiling on a sewer assessment. Because if you give them that exemption, they're going to take it, and then nobody's going to support the reason why we gave it, which was to offset the additional debt service that'll be included in their taxes. So this is going to have to be strategically done in a way that can be truly, that achieve what you've just said, Jen, that it truly offsets that cost, especially for those who perhaps would have the greatest difficulty paying.
If we say that the 17th, we have no idea, I guess now, of what the most difficult homes to sewer are, or what they look like, or what percentage of those in phase one. Like maybe if we had a better idea of who would actually be at the $17,000 mark now, as opposed to less than that, because like what you said, the hookups in front of the house, it's easy. There's no, they're not,
I think on average, Jen, it's more. This is a ceiling with a subsidy. And then we have additional costs, connection, system development, and then an annual user fee.
Right,
You
but
know, your sewer bill.
$7,000 would be the limit on the assessment, with all the extras added on top of that.
The 17 would just be for the assessment.
Okay.
And then on top of that would be the system development charge and the connection.
Thank you.
I think one thing, Mark, could you just talk to the fact that, and we can use the existing project that we're proceeding with, and it's a general benefit project. Can you just speak to the fact that whatever we establish for a sewer assessment amount is the ceiling? And how does it work if, for example, let's use this project, because it is going to come in most likely under whatever we set for a sewer assessment.
Exactly. Thank you for that question, because that's a perfect example of the case where we're going to have homeowners eligible to tie into a system that aren't going to reach the $17,000 cap in probability. Because if you take the cost of that project, which is about $8,500, $8.5 million, and if it can service over about 2,000 properties, I think that comes out to just less than $5,000 per property. And so the abutters along that main trunk line that could tie into that pipe are going to receive a much smaller assessment.
Right.
They have the connection cost. So when you add on the connection cost and the systems development charge, there's the likelihood that they're going to be less than $17,000.
But we don't have an idea of how many houses or how many clusters of those particular types we don't have any metric on that at all.
No, we don't have any metrics on that.
We're just saying 17,000 will be the max for the base assessment.
That would be the maximum.
Yeah.
Yep.
It'd be interesting to know what the difference is, like how many are that will come in at $5,000 or $6,000. You know, that would be a benefit.
The challenge that we have is, even within phase one, I mean, we're only working on the first year of phase one in design. So everything, like Mark illustrated with the pump stations, everything is conceptual, even the estimates on costs. So the best we can do, I think, is what I shared with Councilor Neary, which is try to create some averages in logical groups of customers so that people can have a feeling for what they're looking at. And then they're gonna have to look at their property and they're gonna have to say, geez, you know what, everything runs out back and there's a significant slope here and I'm probably in that higher category. It's gonna be that back and forth. And, you know, to answer your question, Jen, we're gonna put in place staff, so when a resident calls, differently than before, we're gonna put in place a staff, so when a resident calls, they're gonna be able to call in to a logical, to a person who understands the full process, and they're able to answer questions. And I think that'll be extremely helpful, backed up by a database that everybody can access on the website. And yeah, and it'll be, obviously, it'll be a you know, continuous improvement because we'll have new questions and new information and updates to this plan, and they'll all be reflected there. It'll be as transparent as we can make it, and it'll be as informative as supportive as we can provide. So,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
Mark, are the user fees based on the water usage of each house?
Well, the projected flows are based on water, but the user fees are calculated in a model based on the costs associated with the operation of the wastewater facility. Yeah, the wastewater treatment.
So that's for everybody.
That is for Seward customers. And then we have a septage rate. So in essence, everybody pays us at some point, assuming that either your sewage comes to us or you have your septic system pumped and it comes to us.
So maybe I'm missing the point here, but when I was using the system here in Hyannis, and we were hooked up to the sewer facility, we paid accordingly to how much water we put through our system.
Yes.
So it is adjustable by how much the customer utilizes the system ultimately.
It's based on flow, yeah.
On flow, okay.
And that's why we ask customers to separate out things like, you know, sprinklers, outdoor sprinklers, because if you run if you're billed based on water that never goes through your plumbing and is used for irrigation purposes, you're going to pay an awful lot of money for what is only partially sewage. So, yeah. Yep.
I have a question.
Yeah, Councilor Atzelis, please.
So if I missed this in your presentation, Mark Milne, I apologize, but looking at slide 9, you have a Title 5, you have an estimated cost per property of $13,000. How do you arrive at the $17,000 in the example and the recommended amount?
So it's a number that we thought was fair and equitable based on that cost, which, taken into consideration, it's not PMDL compliant. Title V does absolutely nothing to remove nitrogen from the system. Secondly, the last project we did cost about $15,000 per sewer unit. Adjusted for inflation, brings that cost closer to the $17,000. And that we felt was a good balance between what the property owners impacted under this program would need to pay and what the general fund.
Thank you.
Councilor Clark?
Thank you very much, President Hubert. Two things. Will Mark's presentation, PowerPoint presentation, be available for the public to view on the website? And if so, where?
Yes, it is already up and it's under the town council section on the website under presentations.
And when the website for this project is going to be posted, where will someone find it? Is it on the homepage? Is it on
Yes, it'll be front and center on the homepage, just like COVID is and just like the other priorities. And it'll remain there until the project's done. Yep.
Madam Vice President.
Just one other thing, Mark, on page 3, under resources, I see you haven't put in the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. The possibility, is that because it's so unknown?
Yeah, well, it doesn't come through our books, sort of speak. The way we'll receive it is through a principal subsidy. And so if we fund a project for, say, $10 million and receive a 10% subsidy, we only have to borrow 9 million. So it's not reflected in this fund. We don't receive the actual $1 million in cash.
Thank you. And to President Hebert's question about flow, what's the adage? If it's yellow, let it mellow. Then if it's brown, you flush it down, right?
Thank you. Yes.
So relevant to the question that I had posed initially, it sounds as though we're between 13 and 17 for the sewer assessment. And I think, all discussion is logical, especially when we begin to add on the system development charge and the connection. So, Mark and I can bring this forward in a draft ordinance. I don't know, obviously we're not asking for a vote on anything this evening. We're just trying to get feedback from you all. So that's where I'm feeling as though we're leaving this discussion relevant to the ceiling on the sewer assessment. And we'll have to run some more information, Mark, and try to see I think we'll have to look at what the impacts are between 13 and 17, obviously from the general fund subsidy, so that we can share that and then come to some number with our council before obviously that ordinance can be approved.
Okay.
Is that a reasonable place to leave this, or do you want to have further discussion on that one?
Seems reasonable.
I agree. Yeah.
All right, thank you. The next item was relevant to interest rates, Mark. Why don't you just reinforce your recommendations? I think you've tried to minimize the interest rate is what you've done here under the law.
Yes, so every assessment that we've done in the past, whether it's been a sewer assessment or a road betterment, we've always applied a 5% interest rate. It defaults to that rate under the law unless the council votes something different. In an attempt to try to make this more affordable, our proposal is, because we can borrow funds at a much lesser rate than 5%. We would propose that whatever rate we do borrow money at, that we only tack on a 2% additional rate to cover some of our administrative costs associated with this program. Our last bond issue, for example, the interest rate was about 1.6%. We're eligible for 1.5% as a housing choice community, borrow through the state revolving loan fund, a nutrient reduction program, borrowing through the state revolving loan fund is eligible for 0%. And so those low interest borrowing rates offer us the opportunity to pass that on to the homeowner with a lesser interest rate. We think we can get it below 5%, assuming that we continue to achieve those very affordable borrowing rates on our borrowings. And the reality of it is as well that we never collect all the interest on the assessments. Many of the assessments get paid off early through home refinancing or a transfer of ownership. Those liens get paid off. The interest goes away. We never collect it, but yet we have a 30-year bond that we have to pay for with interest. So we're recommending that we add the 2% onto the borrowing costs that we incur and pass that on as the interest rate on the assessments.
Thank you. Councilor Bogan, please.
Again, that would have been my recommendation even before I saw what you were proposing. It seems to be appropriate to tie it to the town's financing rate as opposed to some fixed rate that may be unreasonable at some point in the future, one way or the other. So I agree with the recommendation.
Thank you. Councilor Neary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a point of clarification too. So this bond is taken out, it's a 30-year bond. That rate is locked for the town and thank goodness for your stewardship, Mark, and the rest of the staff in town to actually be able to have the town rated so high that we're afforded these type of rates. So I know that there may be some of the public that might think, oh, well, interest rates, I mean, historically, recent history, rates have been very low. But this is this 4%, or let me rephrase it, the borrowing rate for the town does extend for that 30-year period. That's correct, right?
That's correct.
So therefore, that's why we're able to afford, town is able to put forward a 4%, in effect, fixed rate to the residents of the town in this program.
Yeah, so it'll be a fixed rate over the life, but it could be slightly different by each assessment depending upon what our borrowing cost was for that particular project. We may borrow at 0%, so we'll charge 2%. We may borrow at 1.5%, so they'll be assessed at 3.5%. So it could be a little bit different based on each project, but it will be fixed for the life of the assessment.
That's great. That's a very good point. I appreciate you bringing that forward. These rates, obviously, they're historic at this point, but again, without good financial stewardship, we wouldn't be afforded these to even offer them to the residents. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. I think it's very, very clear that the councilors are very sensitive about the cost to the individual homeowners. And I do think that, the silver lining is every time you come up with, well, consider this, the expense of a super system as opposed to sewering, doesn't seem to even be a debate on this. We know that it's less expensive to do sewering in the town than these very expensive systems to reduce the nitrates. But when you throw in then, the tidbits, not tidbits, they're very substantial. Tax exemption on our real estate is wonderful. No out-of-pocket expense at the time of hooking up if you work with the town. That's a beautiful thing for putting people at ease. Potential savings on if the town does the connection. That's kind of feel good about. The interest rates, that people don't have to go out to a bank to try to get a good interest rate. The town wants to provide that. So those are all the things that I think do help us to put the packet together to present to the public that we're doing the right thing. But there's certainly no councilor that's indicating that this is a easy thing to do for all of our residents. And I think a lot of credit is due to our councilors for their sensitivity to what this means to the individual homeowner. And not surprisingly, because we are all, most of us, homeowners, and so it is a big concern. Yeah. Councilor Levette, please.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Also to my fellow councilors, great questions. A lot of my questions have been answered by just listening to your input and experience in regards to those, especially those who are already in Hyannis that have sewer. My I guess comment would be, I really think that we need to wow our constituents with the level of outreach that we're going to put out there. That is really going to go far as convincing people that this is what we need to do. Not only what you need to do, but it's the right thing to do, and we're doing these things for the right reasons. And that obviously it's for the future of it's for our community that this maintain a livable place. We already have threats from our blue economy, threats from to our coastal resilience, and so just again another thing that to tack on as far as our estuary and our drinking water, and I know this echoes all other councilors concerns. But again, going back to that, utilizing Channel 18, once we're allowed to actually see each other in person, meetings, workshops, things of that nature, just a general hotline, as you mentioned, Manager Els. I think that's a great idea so that there's somebody at all times able and educated to answer any questions. So I just, I appreciate all the input tonight, all the thought that's gone into it. And again, I think that wow factor is really important so that people will look at us and say, you know what, they really, they left no stone unturned as far as communicating why we're doing this. So thanks so much.
Thank you. And so the last,
Councilor Cullum has a question.
Councilor Cullen, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I think that the idea of refining your home to erase almost, because most people have that equity, have $17,000 worth of equity in their home or whatever. So just the concept of refining and showing people that there's a way to absorb the costs without looking at your quarterly bill and freaking out is a really good technique. So if there's a way we can communicate that, like a kind of a financial management piece to it, when we communicate about the cost of the sewers, I think that would go a long way to alleviate fears about $17,000 in this, because that number is such a, as Councillor Steinhilber was saying, it can be very shocking to people. But when you think about, I guess the concept is that the town isn't trying to make money off the citizen. That's what I want to communicate more than anything. It's that it's a necessary public works project that we need to preserve our environment and where we live. And that there's mechanisms in place to make that easier on the individual homeowner. And I think that idea of the refi that Mark Milne brought up is something that could be communicated on a regular basis, ad hominem, to make it a little clearer to the average Joe how they can manage the situation. Just a thought. Thank you.
I think outreach to our local lenders is a great mechanism so that when our residents are contemplating these fiscal challenges that they have, they know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And they can offer that guide, because Mark and I and other staff go into a very gray area when we step over the public line into the private line. So I think that I think would be effective. We can call in our local lending institutions and have them as briefed on this and the challenges, and what a wonderful customer service opportunity to be able to help us as a community think through the options.
And it's just intent. Do you know what I mean? Intent of informing the citizen beyond the scope of government.
Yes.
How can we help the resident in another way come to terms with a project that's necessary?
I would agree that everything we can do is critical here, because this is significant. This may be the one largest effort that we undertake, certainly in the next decade. If I might, there's still 2 items and then a major one, and I don't know how you want to deal with it, but 2 quick ones. It seemed to me from earlier discussion that you weren't opposed to us giving residents an option for connection.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure we build that into the ordinance we bring forward to you. We're also going to try to, as talked about with Councilor Neary and others, we're going to try to give them the reference point on average, so they know what that connection means. Lastly, and then I'll go to the tough one. Lastly, the implementation of the system development charge really falls on your town manager in approval of the rates that our Water Pollution Control Division established and charge and review and approve or not approve on an annual basis. And this would be, Mark, if I'm correct, this is a fiscal year charge that would fall into water pollution control?
That is correct.
So DPW will bring this forward to me for consideration, probably February, March of this year. So I would like to know from you all if, in concept, you recognize the value of adding this, or is there concern? Because I believe ultimately the authority falls under your town manager. So any feedback would be greatly appreciated there.
Councilor Starr, please.
Thank you. So, Mr. Ells, don't we already have a systems development charge for the water department, Hyannis Water Department?
In water department, in certain areas, we do, not in wastewater.
Oh, not in wastewater. Okay.
No, sir, we do not.
But I would bet I bet every water department probably has a development charge.
It varies depending on their rate structure. It is not uncommon to have system development charges, but again, it varies.
Okay.
Madam Vice President, does that answer some of the decision questions?
Well, I don't know if anybody answered it, but I would concur with the recommendation. The $1,600 one-time fee. I would concur with that decision. Yep.
Okay.
I don't know how my fellow councilors vote. And our next one on the general fund contribution too. That's
well, that's the tough one yes, to get some direct, because obviously that fills the gap that depending on the level of the sewer assessment, we establish as a ceiling, then it creates the general funded piece. If you would like to, we can certainly entertain that discussion now, or we can continue that discussion in detail.
Well, I don't know if Mark has last week's presentation, but he did speak about that on the December 3rd meeting, where the town would fill in if we were to cap it. Right, Mark? Didn't you? Page 4 of your presentation from last week.
From the previous week.
The cost sharing based on $17,000. You did give us a little preview of that.
Yes. Page 3.
Or it's 4. Or it's 4 on mine.
Okay. Page 4 was an example of the cost apportionment last week. Yeah. So that shows that that was just an example of a cost share at a $17,000 assessment. If a special benefit cost of $3 million was allocated out to 50 property owners, it would result in a 50% share would result in a $30,000 assessment to the property owner. And when you add the general benefit cost to that of another $5,000, is a total assessment of $35,000. So that's really what that was an example of. It was just a cost sharing example between an assessment and the subsidy that the town would have to provide for one specific project.
If I might ask, but if we put that figure out of 35,000 and that's misconstrued by the public as the end price, it's that high figure that I think frightens people, and I think sends all the councilors into concern about how do we present this to the public? Unless it's clear that they're going to be subsidized. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yep. That's why we were recommending a fixed dollar amount cap, because if we went with let's say a 50-50 cost share, like we did on our last sewering project, this program is going to have a tremendous difference between assessments on a project by project basis. And so nobody's going to be treated the same. And that's why we stayed away from a cost sharing ratio of 50-50, 75-25, because when you do it on a percentage cost share, the assessments are going to be different. if we fix the dollar amount, which is what we're proposing, then everybody pays the same. And the subsidy from the town is dramatically different. That's the difference between the allocation of the sewer assessments. You can either do it on a percentage cost share basis, or you can fix a dollar amount. And we're recommending a fixed dollar amount adjusted annually for inflation.
Madam Vice President.
Well, as Mark L said, this is the hard question as far as our major decision. Do we want to go with a debt exclusion and put something on the ballot? Or do we want, which is what's being recommended, or I don't think anybody wants to cut into our capital programs and start cutting teachers and policemen and staff and programs. So for me, I don't see any other choice but to go for a ballot question. But the concern I have is timing and when that could occur to make it a little more palatable for us, given our circumstances, COVID.
Councilor Cullen.
I would support putting it on the ballot, but my concern with timing is more that we have enough opportunity to educate people about the ins and the outs of a very complicated program. So, I mean, if we can stretch it as long as we can, I heard 2 years kicked around earlier from Mark Milne, then I think it's a long road to getting people to understand where we're going with this and why we're doing it. And so 60 days is definitely too short. And I agree with Councilor Steinhilber that in a COVID year, in a COVID recovery year in 2021, there's so much that people are grappling with from this whole pandemic that the timing's not perfect right now. But I understand the sense of urgency, and I definitely believe that the educational piece is going to either get us there or not get us there. It's really dependent on that. So I would ask that we take some serious time to consider that and work diligently toward that.
Could we consider in our fiscal planning then that a debt exclusion option is something that the council will consider, and Mark will try to run the fiscal models to see how far we can put that out to give us time to prepare? Is that a reasonable assumption with the council, or?
I speak for the other 12 of us, but for me, I would support that.
I think that's reasonable. I think maybe just in my head, I'm thinking, spring of 2022, like a March vote of 2022. Mark had said at least a year, we're fine, maybe 2. So it's not exactly splitting the difference, but it's close to. But I also don't want to run into a situation where you put it out as far as it possibly could go. It doesn't pass, and then you're in the situation where we're basically having to put a hard pause on what we're trying to accomplish and figure out something else. So you want to put it out, but then also have some time to come up with a backup plan so that we're not hitting a hard pause on what we're all trying to accomplish here. So I'm thinking, March of 2022, something like that.
Councilor Smith.
Yes, and I think the other feature that's important is where we do land on that system assessment, because I think if people feel that there's a fairness to the homeowner, assuming some of the burden, and then the larger community willing to do its share, I think, I don't think there's a perfect number, but I think there's a number there, and maybe your modeling can determine what, if we lower the sewer assessment, how much does that increase the debt exclusion burden, so that we can have a better sense of what's that sweet spot.
And is there any concern about timing? And I agree with the councilors that timing is important right now because we are going through this difficult time of the COVID. But in the background is if we don't get going and there's pressure from the courts or from other groups or from the state or whoever, that's where that fear, and I think it's okay to say that, if we get into a wastewater authority that comes down and tells us what to do and orders it done and just gives us the bill, it's going to be a lot more expensive. So maybe that's not on the table anymore, but it always seemed to me that we were under a certain amount of pressure to move as quickly as possible, to make the commitment, to make the decision so that we're on our way. So that's where the time sensitivity, I believe, comes in. Councilor Steinhofer.
Yeah, I agree. That's always been an issue, but I think the fact that we're actually putting pipes in the ground come April, that's huge. And that's really hard for someone to make an argument that we're not doing anything. We've been allocating money for several years leading up to this. You know, our plan goes back to when we created the funding mechanisms here so that we could get things started while we figured some of these pieces out. And we still have money in that fund to allocate for some more projects, but we have pipes going in the ground come April. So it would be a really hard case to make based on the work we've done over the past, 6+ years now, to say we're not doing anything. I feel really strongly in that respect, and I hope others do too. So that's one thing that we got going. We've allocated funds. We have pipes going in the ground. We're moving on this, but public education is important. Timing is important, but we got to find that sweet spot, like Councilor Schnepp said. So I think we're on pretty solid ground when we're gonna put shovels in the ground come spring.
I totally agree, and that's also a plus when we are talking to the public about how much has been accomplished already and where we're at. I think speaks well for the process that we're working on. Totally agree. Councilor Starr.
If we were to put the ballot off till say next March, that's not going to slow any of the construction down, is it? We would still be moving forward.
Correct. Not for anything that's currently approved.
Right.
Depending on the timing of that, I think it may impact decision-making for future projects, because at some point, Director Milne is going to say, with this vote, you're obligating beyond the financial plan, given where we are today. If we're not going to move, let's say, with a debt exclusion, you're obligating beyond what we have the capacity for. So, and he and I had this discussion day one, that he's going to throw me that red flag as soon as we're approaching, because we're not going to obligate beyond our fiscal ability without making the corresponding fiscal policy decisions to support whatever we're going to do.
So I can see, I see the rationale for waiting till March is, I think this is going to need, like Ms. Jen Cullum was saying, that we're going to need some face-to-face meetings with the Civic Association. Doing it by Zoom isn't going to do it. So hopefully by, a year from now, we can start having meetings maybe in the fall into winter.
Again, I think once Mark and I have a better feeling for where we want to go with fiscal policy, knowing that it can change, then we can embark on that. But having been frontline 10 years ago and seeing the course change, after we began, that created a lot of confusion, and that eroded, I think, some of the support that we had. I think this will be very helpful. We will go forward. We will meet. I'm not going to limit it to all these civic associations, and face-to-face, hopefully, if we can do that. But it's going to go far beyond that. I want to engage every citizen, because it's going to impact every single one of us. And so we've got to find some way that everybody in our community knows this is going on. And to the degree that they want to gain understanding, they can do it. And I won't be satisfied until we're at that level of communication.
That's good.
Any other councilors' response to the general evening or to what town manager just said?
No, I think what Mr. L says is important, because we watched the Vineyard Wind start their education, and 2 years later, people were saying, "I've never heard of this," you know. So it's important, and I think, but we've got specific properties identified, and we can knock on doors and meet everybody.
Great. Councilor Dagwan?
Yes, I think this is the most important decision that needs to be made, and it includes the public. And I think to find various ways to communicate it to our public. I thought Channel 18 did a wonderful job with the stormwater runoff. Seeing that presentation is excellent, simple, easy to learn. And I think and they just won an award recently for what they did for our media employees. So I think that if we can include them to do something that can get this override out to the public in a simple way for them to understand the pros and cons of it. And, it's something that we have to do, as Councilor Cullum and others have said, that it's our livelihood. We need to get people to really understand that. So I think to engage them to help us to get the message out, because they did do a beautiful job with the water, stormwater runoff presentation.
Thank you. Town Manager, could you just elaborate a little bit more, because I totally agree with Councilor Cullum's approach to reaching out to the public, making sure the public knows what we're doing and keeps them up to date and well informed. But to Attorney Nover's mentioned that we can't use the funds of the town. So the marketing group that you're working with, is that a doable thing? And then, like I know when they did the tech school, I think it was friends of the tech school that did most of the marketing and the proposals and stuff, getting information from the school committee on the cost and the final cost of the project. But how does that work in terms of how we can be helpful as a council, besides making the decisions, in terms of the marketing and the public information?
Well, I think that our limitations come when a decision's made to go out for the debt exclusion or override. Prior to that, we can utilize all mechanisms to communicate the various aspects of what we are embarking on. So I think that's where the limitation is, when there is going to be a vote, to do that. But I'll certainly confirm that with Councilor Nover. But that was my understanding the last time we did it. And I think it was a wise decision last time, though it was very confusing because of the timing and the changes in decisions that were made concurrent with the implementation. We've got to address private roads as well. There's no way we're going to do this plan and 40% of our roads in town are private, and we're going to go into private roads and tear them up and put in sewers and not address private roads when we're doing that. That absolutely has to be a part of this. It will not work. And that was brought forward before to the town manager. And I think at the end, I have the benefit, or maybe maybe it's not a benefit, to have been Public Works Director. So I lived this, for the entire time I was there. And you cannot do this plan without addressing private roads. So, and finally, I think that our town manager at the time really recognized that, but it was late. And so it was very confusing to our public. And we don't want that. We want all of this laid out for them as far in advance as we possibly can, inform them, answer their questions. We can't go out and market, though. That's not something that we can really do in the public sector. We have to be very careful of that. So step by step, I would certainly coordinate with Karen or whoever she recommends, as we did with our former attorney. And we did not violate anything in going forward. But so I guess to answer your question, I didn't answer it. We will develop a plan. I think it becomes very sensitive once we set a vote for that for that override or debt exclusion. Debt exclusion is recommended if we go with what Director Milne, to me, I recommend. But we will have a plan in place, and we may need to engage others to carry this message forward as well. And hopefully between now and then, to Councilor Cullum's point, if we give ourselves adequate time, we can gain that support and we can muster those resources to assist us in this effort. And that's what we're going to have to do. It's going to be a community-based effort, and they're either going to be on board or they're not. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Starr?
Right, so maybe someday there'll be a group, Barnstable Friends of Barnstable Sewage, Friends of Barnstable Sewage, and they'll advocate for us. You know.
You can be the chair of that committee.
No, I don't want. I can't be. You know, and that's conflict of interest. You know.
We're going to need all the friends we can get.
Yeah. So can I circle back? I have one quick comment about the Title V systems costing $13,000.
Yes.
I think that $13,000 cost shouldn't even be shouldn't be here, because they don't do what we need to do. People shouldn't be able to build Title V. I know they're legal, but in the project, the task we've been given to lower our nitrogen, it doesn't meet our needs. So it's really not an option. I mean, we're really looking at the $22,000. I mean, if anybody was going to change a system, that's where we need to be.
But the reference point, your point is on task, and that's why we've started the discussions with our Board of Health. But the reference point for the resident on Cape Cod is a Title V system, because that's what's allowed by law. Now, it doesn't help you. It's interesting that, and as part of some of the legal arguments out there, that you know, these non-point sources cumulatively are the cause of the problem, yet the point sources like us at a wastewater treatment plant are the ones that are being held accountable to achieve these TMDLs. So it comes back to what I said a minute ago. Everybody's got to get educated. Everyone's got to be on board. It's a community-based effort. They're either going to support it or they aren't. And if they don't, we've got some really tough fiscal decisions to make, because it's my opinion as your town manager that we have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so the financial burden shifts back to us, and it will be significant if we have to carry this with existing resources.
But I still think the $13,000 gives people a false sense of, well, that's where I start. I mean, that's my option.
But we didn't make that up. That's the county average.
And I know it's legal at the moment also. So
exactly. But I agree with you. And that's why we've begun the discussion with the Board of Health, because you're comparing apples and oranges. You're comparing a Title V system that doesn't reduce nutrient load, yet we're being asked to reduce nutrient load. So it's the higher cost, both in capital and in operations, that you really need to try to achieve that reduction. But the reference point is what the law allows, which is the Title V.
Okay, I give up. Okay.
It's also, like you said, it's the reality, though. I mean, it is, we have to be very careful. You can try to make that high-level argument, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a baseline, what people are used to, and we have to embrace that to put our best foot forward to get this through. You can't, we don't want to take chances with trying to make that argument. It's just going to be really difficult. I get it. We get it. And Councilor Starr is right. But the general public is going to be on that number, what it costs to put in the Title V. That's the law. That's the reference point. That's the reality. And that's what we have to embrace.
Thank you. Councilor Shaughnessy, followed by Councilor Levesque.
I was just going to say, we also need to stress that $17,000 is not the cost. $17,000 is the maximum. That is the cap. So in some cases, this might actually be costing them less than $13,000, again, depending on their neighborhood and where their septic is. And I think it's important to stress that, because I think people's takeaway is also going to be, I'm paying $17,000, when really that is the maximum. That is not going to apply to every property, but it could apply to some. And then lastly, I just did want to say that I do support the recommendation to go for the debt exclusion.
Thank you, Councilor Levesque.
I'm actually gonna pass. You can come back to me, but I also saw Councilor Atzelis's hand up, so I don't let him go first, and I'll go after him.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you, Councilor Atzelis.
Thank you, Councilor Levesque. I obviously we're all conscious, and we've discussed how we have to, we're being conscientious of the homeowners and what it's going to cost them. And I just want to offer a little perspective. In my business, it's often where homeowners have to implement or install new Title V septic systems. And I can tell you the last 3 that clients of mine did, not one of them approached $17,000. And I only use it as an example because, again, people are going to be concerned about what this is going to cost them, and they are going to have those numbers as reference point. So we do have a job to do in educating the consumer or the homeowners out there, but that is going to be their reference point. So that's why I asked my question originally about how you arrived at 17,000. Well, I can just tell you from experience, I haven't seen one approach 17,000 unless it's a really, really unique area that the home is located in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Levesque.
Councilor Atzelis, he touched upon what I was thinking as well, and unfortunately, that's the reality. But yet, like you said, that Councilor Starr pointed to, the other reality is that the Conservation Law Foundation, if we keep putting Title V's in the ground, isn't going to let up on their lawsuits, so they're threatened to sue us, or we're not going to meet the goals of the 208 plan or the Clean Water Act that we're held accountable to if we keep putting Title V's in the ground the way they are. So again, without any nitrogen mitigation going on, the TMDLs and all that. And again, I just wanted to commend Town Manager Ells for having those conversations with the Board of Health. And, from what I've seen, the Board of Health, the chairman in particular has been pretty responsive to have those discussions and understands the fact of what the expectation is that, and the reality is that the Title V's moving forward. I mean, we all foresee a day where these Title V's aren't going to be permissible because it doesn't, it's not going to solve the problem long term. And and to go back to what you also said, Town Manager Ells, about the fact that your experience is a good thing. And I think I speak for all of us that, right place at the right time. We're blessed to have your experience here and have that knowledge at your fingertips there. And so again, my point is, I get, that those Title V's, but we really need to push it, again, as high as we can. That $17,000, 15,000, I think we have to be above what the average Title V system is, because the bottom line is this is going to cost more than the Title V system, and it has to be paid for, and we don't want to cut services because of it, and hopefully this will give us the ability to add growth and to our town through this, and I think that needs to be communicated as well, that this will give us more opportunity to grow as a community so that these services can be paid for as well. Thank you.
I think we always have to look at value added also, and that was pointed out in the value of our homes go up. So I know when I went to look for a house, the first thing I said is, do you have town water and do you have town sewer? Those are 2 things that meant a lot to me because it took a lot of worry and concern off the plate. So, yeah. Okay, so councilors, how do you want to wind up here? We're at 9:40. We about had it for our discussion tonight. Any closing comments? Council Levesque, followed by Council Cullen.
Do we come to what we want to do as far as the plan? I'm sorry if I missed it, as far as the general fund goes and how much we're going to rely on that? Was that,
Our
was that discussed?
recommendation was that Director Milne would equate, depending on the assessment level, Director Milne could equate that to a debt exclusion vote for really representative of a 5-year construction period. And that's what we would plan to try to implement. In the event that that wasn't successful, we would have to step back and look at other options to fill that gap. And one of them would be utilization of within the existing tax levy general funds, and those general funds go to our operating and capital budget.
Yeah. Okay. So it'll be something to be discussed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Cullen?
I guess my comment would be, first of all, thank you so much for all your hard work and grit, and I don't know how you pour over numbers like this and come up with these amazing reports, but they're very circumspect, and I appreciate that. And I just wanted to ask, is there anything else you need from us? Have we answered most of the action points that were on the, or all of them actually, that were on the PowerPoint, Mark?
Mark and I are ready to bring a draft sewer assessment ordinance to you for a first read. We will provide the supportive information we've described. We'll work with you until we modify it to the point that you're, ready to hopefully approve it. And we're also going to be bringing in the FY22 capital budget, more projects. I think you may even see a supplemental one coming to you shortly, relevant to the treatment plan. I'm not sure if it's going to coincide with the budget or not. So, no, you making yourselves available through this special, town council meeting shows your leadership, shows your commitment, and that's all we can ask. And Mark and I and Dan Santos and others, Karen Nova, will continue to bring questions as they arise. Thank you.
Good question from Council Cullen here is, so what I see outstanding is the final kind of presentation, what that's going to look like, that you're going to bring forward. But I heard from several councilors a great concern about the timing. So when you make the proposal, will you be able to indicate, to meet some of the concerns of the councilors about the timing of when we go for the vote?
I think Mark's going to try to simulate for us how far out we could put that. Mark, is that reasonable?
Yes, that is reasonable.
And then we're going to have bigger decision points down the line if the plan as proposed never can be implemented because a key part, let's say a debt exclusion vote, is not successful. And then we are going to have to modify and bring back to you the implications relevant to fiscal policy and the implications relevant to operating and capital. So, but that will remain an unknown until we bring all of these through a decision point, whether it's a council or whether it's a general public decision.
All right. Very, very, very fundamental to the whole process is when it does go to public vote, is that I think you've been clear tonight that I don't think any councilor expressed that it was a good idea to cut our general operating funds and cut our schools or fire or, our police, any other major department in the town. I don't think that there's an appetite for that. So I think you get that from the council. If any councilor wants to disagree with me on that, but I think that's where we're at.
Councilor Steinhilber had a question.
Steinhilber, please.
Just kind of quick wrap-up comment. I'd like to see maybe numbers wrapped around like a $15,000 assessment. When I mentioned 13, that's just because that was the original presentation you gave us, and then it jumped up to 17. So I wasn't necessarily advocating for 13, but 15, I think, keeps that assessment closer to an average Title V. But then when you do the add-ins, potentially you're topping out at what a higher-end system would cost you now. So I'm just trying to find the balance. So maybe that if we could see that $15,000 number, and I get it's a ceiling, But again, perception's reality. They're gonna see that number and they're gonna think that's the cost. So that number is important, even though it's just a, just closing comment for, our next discussion.
Thank you. Madam Vice President.
I have a question because if we talk about deferring, we have to vote at council level, put it to the voters of the community on a debt exclusion. If we wait 2 years, these numbers could significantly increase. And is that correct, Mark? I mean, what we're talking about today might not be the reality 2022.
Well, we've built into our projection for the 30-year program a cost for inflation. And so whether you make a decision 1 year or 2 years from now, the costs that we're using in the program have that factor for inflation built in. So we've accounted for that. Your vote to put a ballot out will not impact the cost of the program, the time.
Okay, maybe not our vote, but what about the citizens' vote? So it won't. So and then I guess this is for Karen. If the council were to vote to put this on a ballot in 2 years, can we do that now, or do we have to wait 90 days out from when we'd like to see it on the ballot?
I would have to take a look at that.
Okay.
I don't have an answer for you on that right now, but I'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Levesque.
I know we have to tackle what's been put before us this evening, but just a question maybe for the public that might be listening too, and I know that it's a possibility. When does the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund possibilities kind of come into play?
It is in place now.
Okay.
So there's a couple of ways that those funds can be applied, and Barnstable, I believe, is one of 4 or 5 communities in the original statute that are also eligible for prior project, meaning we can get some principal subsidy to prior SRF funded projects. That's why it is so critical. Like right now, in some years, we're the only ones on Cape Cod listed. So we've got no competition. So we want every single one of our wastewater projects to be eligible for SRF funds because we're going to get a principal subsidy. Going forward, I think it's not an unsimilar circumstance. We're the big user. And so, that's in place. The next board meeting begins to discuss the principal subsidies to the current IUP that's just come out. We are listed for several projects. And then we will subsequently probably start a discussion about prior projects. We really haven't had a lot of discussion at this point about the prior and how we're going to do that. It's an unknown market right now. We're very concerned about revenue projections and are they representative? Are they low? Are they high? And plus we have no trend here to be able to say, okay, yeah, we've got 3 to 5 years worth of data. So we know what sort of revenue we're going to see. And we're confident that this sort of subsidy, given the projects we have, is appropriate. So it's a work in progress, but it can happen now. We adopted the regulations already.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, any more input from councilors? All right, so I take a motion if we'd like to adjourn for the evening. You've been almost kind and generous with your time, especially for Councilor Steinhilber, who would like to be home with his family, I'm sure, his anniversary.
Well, I am home.
Oh, you are?
Well, we're all home. I'm just in a different area of the house.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn.
Second. First, we have a second. Thank you very much. Do we want to do a roll call on this, that we're all in agreement? Yes, we have to.
It's a roll call.
Yeah.
Counselors, Etzler,
Yes.
Bogan,
Yes.
Clark.
Yes.
Cullum.
Yes.
Dagwan.
Yes.
Rob Corsetti.
Yes.
Hebert,
Yes.
Levesque,
Yes, please.
Neary,
Yes.
Neff,
Yes.
Shaughnessy,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Steinhilber,
Yes.
13 yes.
Very much. Town manager, thank you very much. Director Milne and all the staff and legal department, thank you very much. Thank you, councilors, and we will meet again on December 17th, 7 p.m., God willing. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank
Happy
you.
anniversary.